Martha Edwards has never been the adventurous type. At 67, after 4 decades of teaching English in the Riverdale public schools, she retired with the intention of taking it easy. Morning tea, afternoon crochet, and Sunday church with the same old friends. On that cloudy Wednesday, everything seemed to be going as expected, until a few blocks from a thrift store where she wanted to donate some old books, her car suddenly stopped. No sign of life, no explanation. As she looked around for help, her heart raced in a way it hadn't since she was a nervous schoolgirl. Across the street, with faded letters and graffiti on the walls, was the infamous Iron Horse Bar. Martha had heard about it for years. Stories of fights, loud motorcycles, and troubled-looking people. She considered waiting in the car, but her cell phone battery was dying, and night was approaching. Taking a deep breath, she crossed the street with uncertain steps, feeling the gaze of some bearded and tattooed men who were leaning on their motorcycles, laughing loudly between sips of beer. As soon as she approached the entrance, one of them, tall, with a leather vest and grey hair, raised an eyebrow and asked if she was lost. Martha almost turned back, but something in his voice, firm and curiously gentle, made her stay. He quickly explained about the car, the store, and that he only needed help pushing the vehicle to a safe place. She expected a, "We can't help you," maybe a mocking laugh, but no. The man introduced himself as Ray, and before she finished the sentence, he was already calling 2 friends to go with him to the car. "Let's see what we can do, ma'am." No irony, no insinuation, just willingness to help. Martha didn't know it yet, but that crossing of the street would be the beginning of something that would change her life and the lives of many people in Riverdale forever. Within 5 minutes, Ray and the other 2 men, who she would later learn were named Duke and Carlos, were lying under the open hood of Martha's car, each with a key in his hand, exchanging comments about the condition of the belt and the alternator. She felt out of place, standing there on the curb with her purse clutched to her body and her eyes averted from direct contact. But she also couldn't ignore how quickly and seriously these men were trying to help her. None of them asked for money. None of them made jokes. Instead, Ray looked at her with the same expression a father would have when taking care of his daughter's car. When they managed to start the engine, after a few improvised adjustments, Ray stood up with his hands covered in grease and a small smile. "You should take this to a real mechanic tomorrow, but for today, I think it can handle it." Martha smiled back, still a little unsure how to react, but sincerely grateful. She took a $50 bill out of her wallet, but Ray shook his head. "You've done enough coming here without running away." Martha laughed, a little embarrassed, but feeling the ice in her chest begin to melt. That afternoon, as she drove home with the car bumping, she thought more than once about what had just happened. She remembered the stories she had heard at church about the Iron Horse, all-out fights, police involvement, people with bad intentions. But the faces she had seen that day, especially Ray's, didn't match any of those descriptions. They seemed like simple men, perhaps rough in their manner, but with a dignity she hadn't expected to find. When she got home, she went straight to the phone and called her daughter, telling her everything as if she had lived an adventure. And when she hung up, she couldn't get that gray-haired man with tired eyes who seemed to carry some hidden weight behind his kindness out of her mind. In the days that followed, Martha returned to her routine, but the memory of that group of bikers remained vivid in her mind, especially Ray's face. The following Friday, after thinking and rethinking, she decided to prepare some homemade bread and corn muffins, recipes that she always took to the ladies' meeting at church and returned to the Iron Horse, but not without first struggling with her own fear. She parked the car across the street, looked around, took a deep breath, and walked into the bar with the box in her hands. Everyone looked at her immediately, but this time not with suspicion. Ray recognized her from afar and gave her a restrained, almost surprised smile. Martha explained that she wanted to thank them in some way, and the silence that followed lasted only until one of the guys tried a muffin and shouted, "My God, this woman cooks better than my mother." Laughter followed, and something there began to change. not only in the environment, but inside her as well. On the third visit, yes, she returned several times, Martha and Ray finally sat down to talk calmly. It was there that she learned about little Mike, Ray's grandson, an 8-year-old boy who was suffering from a rare form of leukemia. Traditional treatment had not been working, and the doctors suggested an experimental alternative available at a private clinic in another state. The problem was the cost, more than $80,000, not including travel, lodging, and constant tests. Ray spoke with his eyes downcast, as if he were used to swallowing his anguish in silence. Martha listened to everything in silence, feeling a mixture of indignation and a desire to help. She was not a doctor, nor was she rich, but she had something that many forget to value: a network. She knew people from church, schools, and community groups. And at that moment, without saying it out loud, she decided that she was going to do something for that boy, and for that grandfather who, even with a broken heart, still helped strangers on the side of the road. The following Sunday, during morning worship, Martha waited patiently until the end of the service to speak to Pastor Thomas. She explained everything in detail: the broken-down car, the men who had helped her, the sick boy. She said she wanted to organize a fundraiser and needed the support of the church. The pastor listened attentively, thought for a few seconds, and replied that if it meant saving a child's life, he saw no reason to refuse support, even if it involved a biker bar. That gave Martha the push she needed. Over the next few days, she began calling former students, retired teachers, and business acquaintances. Each call was a step out of her comfort zone, but each yes she heard strengthened her conviction that she was doing the right thing. And even when someone expressed concern about the location of the event, she would firmly respond, "If you saw what I saw, you wouldn't be afraid at all." The idea was simple but bold. A charity bazaar at the Iron Horse with home-cooked food, live music, raffles, spontaneous donations, and the sale of crafts made by the women of the church. Ray was surprised when she came up with the proposal, but it didn't take long for him to get involved. He called his friends, cleaned the room, and made sure no one would bring alcohol on the day of the event. "Today is for Mike," he said. Within a few days, handmade posters began to appear in bakeries, pharmacies, and on lampposts in the central square. Some residents turned up their noses, but most were curious. And it was this curiosity that, the following Saturday, filled the space where before there had been only leather, tattoos, and beer, with entire families, children running around, and women serving cornmeal cake. The contrast was so great that even the oldest regulars at the Iron Horse looked around with smiles, as if they were rediscovering their own place. Martha walked between the tables in a makeshift apron, collecting raffle tickets and handing out pieces of pie. Everywhere she looked, she found a familiar face from different worlds. The barber from Main Street, chatting with a biker in a jean jacket. The art teacher selling handmade bracelets next to a man with facial piercings who spoke passionately about mechanics. Children climbed onto the makeshift stage to sing church songs, while the men from the bar helped set up the tables or serve soda. At one point, Ray stopped beside her, and his voice breaking said, "You made this happen, Miss Martha." But she just shook her head. "I didn't do it by myself. I just crossed the street." That struck a chord, and in that silence, loaded with meaning, they both understood that something bigger had been born there, something that could not be named, but that changed the way each of them saw the other. By late afternoon, the heat had been replaced by a light breeze, and her fatigue was mixed with a feeling Martha hadn't felt in a long time: true hope. The fundraiser had raised over $20,000, well above what she had imagined possible in a single day. It didn't cover the entire treatment, but it was a strong start, enough to secure the first round of therapy and give Ray's family time to pursue the rest with more determination. When the amount was announced, there was applause, tears, and hugs. A woman from church said it was a miracle. One of the bikers corrected her, saying it was just the beginning. And maybe they were both right. That night, When Martha got home, she sat on the couch with aching legs, a racing heart and tears in her eyes. For the first time in a long time, she felt like she had done something that really mattered, not just for herself, but for an entire town that seemed finally ready to see itself as a community. By the following Monday, what had happened at the Iron Horse was already the talk of the town. The photos were circulating in the church's WhatsApp groups, in the service clubs, and even in the group of residents who were always complaining about the noise of the motorcycles. What had once been a place feared by many was now called the Boys' Bar, with affection and respect. People who had never spoken to Ray began to greet him on the street. Some local business owners, touched by the repercussion, decided to donate the costs of transportation and lodging for little Mike and his mother during treatment. The online fundraiser, which Martha had helped create with the help of a former student who was good at technology, began to gain momentum. In a few days, what seemed impossible began to happen. The news that the boy would begin the first phase of experimental therapy arrived on a Saturday morning, and Martha cried silently as she sat on the porch with a cup of tea in her hands. Meanwhile, Ray spent his days between the garage and the hospital, dividing his time between engine repairs and caring for his grandson. He was a man of few words, but anyone who knew him knew that something had changed in him. The constant sadness in his eyes had given way to a different kind of strength. It wasn't blind optimism. Ray knew the road was still long, but now there were people walking alongside him, and that made a difference. One day he showed up unexpectedly at Martha's house, bringing flowers from his own backyard and a black jacket with the words "Honorary Iron Horse" embroidered on the back. He said that the guys at the bar had voted for her and that she deserved the title more than anyone. Martha laughed, embarrassed, but accepted it. She had never imagined that something like that would make sense to her, but now it did, and when she put on the jacket right there, in the middle of the living room, she felt that she was carrying on her back not just a name, but a story, one that she would never have imagined living, and that somehow made her more alive than ever. As the weeks passed, the Iron Horse slowly transformed. The reputation that had once frightened the townspeople was replaced by another image, that of a place where differences met, where the community left prejudices at the door to do good. Little by little, the idea of holding charity events there became commonplace. There was an animal adoption fair, a blood drive, and even a potluck lunch at Christmas, organized by an unlikely partnership between the bikers and the youth of the parish. The town of Riverdale began to realize that the labels were not as reliable as they seemed, and many people, seeing what was happening, began to rethink their own attitudes. The bar remained the same on the outside, marked walls, motorcycle club flags, but inside there was something different in the air. It was as if the place had finally found a greater purpose. Martha in turn began to visit the Iron Horse naturally, not as a curious visitor, but as part of it all. She sat at the same tables as always, talked to the men and women she would have avoided before, and laughed like she hadn't laughed in years. It made her rediscover parts of herself that had been hidden since retirement. The feeling of being part of something bigger, of being useful, of being heard. One afternoon, while she was helping to organize posters for yet another campaign, Ray commented that he didn't understand why she cared so much, since she hadn't met Mike before all this. Martha looked at him calmly and replied, "I needed help once too, and someone gave it to me without asking." Ray didn't answer. He just nodded and went back to pinning up the papers. At that moment, there was no need for more words. One morning, a few months after the event, Martha woke up to a letter in her mailbox. It was from the very clinic where little Mike was being treated. She thought it was odd. She wasn't close enough to the family to receive direct news. But when she opened the envelope, she read a letter signed by the medical team, thanking her for the crucial support she had provided. It said that, thanks to the initial fundraising and community involvement, Mike had successfully completed the first 2 phases of treatment. There was still a long way to go, but the prognosis was much better than it had been months earlier. Attached to the letter was a hand-drawn drawing by Mike himself, a white-haired lady in a superhero cape, holding a loaf of cornbread in one hand and a wrench in the other. Martha stood in front of the paper for a few minutes, overcome with emotion, before taping the drawing to the refrigerator door. It was the kind of memory that would never fade with time. The news of Mike's progress was met with celebration at the Iron Horse. That night, everyone gathered for a symbolic toast with soda out of respect for the children and new customers. Ray, never one for speeches, gave a few words of thanks and ended with a simple sentence: "We've changed a lot here, but the thing that's changed the most is us." Martha, sitting in the back, her honorary Iron Horse jacket draped over her shoulders, just smiled. She knew that this moment was more than a thank you. It was an acknowledgement that sometimes all it takes is a courageous act to start a chain reaction, that you don't have to make grand gestures to change the world. You just have to be willing to cross the street when every instinct tells you to stay where you are. And in that moment, amid the bursts of laughter and the clatter of cutlery, she understood that her life, even after retirement, was just beginning to make sense in a new way. A few days later, during a quiet afternoon, Martha was invited to give a short talk at a school in the city. The topic was actions that transform communities, and someone had suggested her name. She hesitated at first. She didn't like the spotlight, but decided to accept. She sat down in front of a room full of teenagers, many of whom looked bored, and began by telling the story of how her car broke down. She spoke simply, without trying to impress. Little by little, everyone's eyes turned to her with more attention. When she described the moment she crossed the street to the bar, there was complete silence. She didn't use fancy words or try to be emotional. She just told what she saw, what she felt, and what it caused. At the end of her talk, a girl raised her hand and asked if she wasn't afraid. Martha smiled and replied, "Yes, I was. But fear didn't save me. What saved me was the step after fear." Back at the Iron Horse, the meetings with the bikers continued, now naturally. They became friends, partners in causes, confidants of stories that most people never heard. What once seemed like a distant universe became an extension of Martha's home. On the bar's wall, among old photos and event posters, there was now a special frame, the drawing made by little Mike, flanked by a photo of her smiling between Ray and Carlos, with the handwritten caption, "Family is who shows up when you need them most." Every time she passed by there, she would stop for a second, adjust her glasses, and take a deep breath. Not because she wanted to attract attention, but because that simple gesture reminded her that, in that unlikely place, she had rediscovered not only the power of empathy, but also a new meaning for the days that before all seemed the same. Time passed, and although routine returned for many, something in Riverdale remained different. The Iron Horse was no longer just a bar, and Martha was no longer just a retired lady. She became a silent reference, someone who didn't need speeches, positions, or headlines to make an impact. She continued to walk calmly through the streets of the city, greeting everyone who crossed her path. But now she received smiles that would have been avoided before, handshakes from people who long ago would have judged her only by her appearance. What began with a broken-down car became a bridge between worlds that ignored each other. And this bridge resisted because it was built with something simple and powerful: respect. Martha never considered herself a hero. She still insisted that she had done nothing wrong, that anyone would have done the same. But deep down she knew that not everyone would cross that street, and that was what made her story special. Not the money raised, not the events, not even the transformation of the bar, but the fact that, that day, she chose to trust strangers and discovered that there was more humanity there than she ever imagined. Sitting in her rocking chair, watching the sunset from the porch, she often thought back to that exact moment when she decided to get out of the car. And every time she remembered, the same thought came to her. Sometimes, we change someone else's world without realizing it. And in doing so, we end up changing our own too.